Today, we're going to dig into a business idea that honestly sounds like a total recipe for disaster, putting two people in the CEO chair. But you know what? A fascinating new study suggests that if you get the conditions just right, it might actually be the smartest move a company can make. So, let's unpack how two captains might just be better than one. You've heard the saying, right? One ship, one captain. It's just common sense that one person needs to be in charge. But as the business world gets more and more complex, you start to need skills that are, and I'm quoting the research here, unlikely to be concentrated in one single individual. So that traditional view, it's being seriously challenged. So, before we go any further, let's make sure we're on the same page. We're talking about shared leadership. It's a huge shift away from that classic top-down pyramid model. Instead, it's all about what the research calls lateral influence among peers. Basically, it's about real collaboration at the very, very top.
Now, this isn't just some abstract idea from a business school textbook. No. It's a real-world trend, and it's becoming especially common in one very specific type of organization, the family firm.
And what's really interesting is when you look at the data. This chart, from the study we're diving into, it shows this clear, steady rise in shared leadership among Italian family businesses. And we're talking about a jump from just under 30% all the way up to almost 40% over 2 decades. That's a pretty significant shift.
So this brings us to the million-dollar question, the one that researchers really wanted to answer. When a family-run company hands over the reins, not to one person, but to a whole team, what does that actually do to the bottom line?
You know, conventional wisdom would probably tell you that a big succession is always disruptive, maybe even a negative thing for a company. And adding 2 leaders, that sounds like it would just make everything worse. But the data tells a completely different story, and frankly, a much more interesting one. And here it is, the key finding. The study discovered that when these Italian family firms switched from a single leader to a shared one during succession, their financial performance, measured by return on equity, actually went up. It wasn't just a small blip, it was a real, statistically significant increase. But hang on, it's not some magic bullet. The researchers are super clear about this. They call this model a double-edged sword, and its success really depends on why and how it's put into place. Let's start with the dark side, the path to failure. The study points out that if co-leadership is just a way to avoid making a tough choice, picking one heir over another, well, it's almost guaranteed to fail. It just becomes about messy family politics, not sound business strategy. And you can see this domino effect perfectly here. It all starts with avoiding that tough choice. That can lead to appointing people who might not be fully qualified. Then, nobody knows who's responsible for what, which slows down decisions, and, well, you can guess what happens next. Conflicts pop up, and that hurts the whole company. But, and this is a big but, when it's done for the right reasons, the picture is the complete opposite. It's a strategic move. You're combining complementary skills, which makes decision-making way more effective. It also lets you have a much smoother, more gradual succession, where the older generation can actually coach the new leaders into their roles. It's a win-win.
So, if the why is so important, what are the specific conditions that make or break this model? The data actually gives us a pretty clear roadmap. So let's get into the 3 big factors that really determine success.
This is where it gets really specific, because that positive impact on performance, it's not a guarantee. The researchers found 3 key things that can seriously weaken the benefits of shared leadership. You can almost think of them as critical warning signs.
So the first warning sign is when the leadership team is a completely closed family circle. When you have no outside voices at all in the CEO office, something really interesting happens. The study points to this fascinating concept called socio-emotional wealth. It's basically the family's emotional investment in the business, the pride, the legacy, all of that. And without an outsider to provide some balance, the desire to protect family harmony can actually lead to really poor business decisions.
All right, the second condition. It takes that exact same problem and scales it up to the boardroom. If the people who are supposed to be overseeing the co-CEOs are also all family members, well, the problem just gets worse.
And there it is again, that tension between family goals and business goals. A board without any independent directors is just much more likely to prioritize the family's emotional needs, sometimes at the real expense of financial performance.
And the final factor the researchers identified, this one has nothing to do with family dynamics and everything to do with scale. Turns out, size really does matter.
So, what it really boils down to is this. Co-leadership works best when you can be agile, when you have that informal communication.
But in huge, bureaucratic companies, all that essential coordination just gets bogged down by rigid structures and formal processes. And that pretty much undermines the whole model.
So, after pulling all this data together, what's the big takeaway here? If you're running a family business, how do you actually get the benefits of co-leadership without falling into all of these traps?
Well, the research gives us a pretty clear three-step guide. First, you have to be strategic about it. Appoint co-CEOs because you need their combined skills not to sidestep a difficult family drama. Second, bring in outsiders, either as a co-CEO or an independent director, to balance out those family priorities. And third, be realistic about scale. This model just works best in smaller organizations.
And all of this leaves us with one final big question. We started with that old idea of one ship, one captain. But in a world where it's pretty clear that no single person can possibly have all the answers, maybe, just maybe, the future of leadership isn't a solo act, but a duet.